by the time they get into leadership, they've already formed habits, some effective habits and some ineffective habits. And now they're just operating from these sets of habits. Pause and reflect what habits, what repeated behaviors that we do pretty much unconsciously are supporting our objectives and which ones are getting in our way.
This executive leadership coaching podcast is about habit change. We're going to go into specific things that you can do to build new habits and make them stick to help you manage and grow your business and lead your team. My name is Raj Kara, host of this podcast, and I'm joined today by Dr. Jeff Kaplan. He's an executive coach of the year. So Jeff, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Raj. Great to be here. Thank you.
You know, habits, something that's become a very big thing in leadership, in teams, in just like personal lives as well. Several books have been written about it. You've got one on habit change. We can talk about that as well. But can you share why habit change is particularly important for business leaders and executives?
Habits produce outcomes, right? And so what happens is, what is a habit? Just really quickly, right? So we say act a certain way, we exhibit a behavior, and then we repeat that behavior so often that it eventually becomes unconscious. And so now it's a habit. And so what happens, I think, is people go into leadership roles, they've already, by the time they get into leadership, they've already formed habits, some effective habits and some ineffective habits. And now they're just operating from these sets of habits. I think what this podcast is doing is just asking us to just take reflection, just pause and reflect what habits, what repeated behaviors that we do pretty much unconsciously are supporting our objectives and which ones are getting in our way.
Now, what's the link between personal habits and professional habits that lead to different professional outcomes?
First of all, the way that habits form are the same, whether it's personal or professional, right? And who we are as a person links into the work environment, right? So like team conflict, right? So everybody's playing out like their unresolved family issues, right? Right.
That happens.
Right. And so when you're growing up, you also formed habits of how you speak with others, how you deal with conflict, how you approach problem solving, right? And so now you're playing those out in the workplace. And look, over in time, you get feedback. Oh, this worked, this didn't work. And so a lot of times we recalibrate, but some of us are stuck into deep ingrained habits and they know like it's not working for them perhaps, but they just don't know how to get unstuck from it.
Now, we're going to go into several specific things in a minute, but do you have an example of something you could share where you knew a business leader who was able to make a habit change? What was the before and after?
Yeah, this one leader, it's hard to say this one leader, so 578 leaders that I know, they have this issue of being really short in their emails and in their conversations, right? And the large majority of them, no fault to their own, they're just problem solvers, right? That feeling stuff is just, who's got time for that, right? Who's got time for, hey, how's your day? Oh, by the way, at least that's how they see it, right? And so with this one particular leader, but certainly with a lot of these leaders, what the first thing is around helping them connect like the impact of the way that they currently are habitually acting with a direct connection between now that person. I had somebody recently tell me, like, yeah, when I get an email from them, I'm just like, yeah, I'll get to it when I get to it. We don't want that. In the same ways, we don't want our doctor to just see us as a number and then going, maybe they'll survive, maybe they won't. We'll see how this goes. Right. We want someone to really go that extra yard. And so first of all, it's helping make that connection. And then it's not just bringing awareness to it, but one of the things that we do a lot of is giving people very practical actions, behaviors that they can do to break that pattern, right? And then create it to eventually becomes a habit. And so with this particular leader and others, other people in their 360s later on said, wow, he's so much nicer, right? And what I would say is, yeah, he's probably being more empathetic and more humble, right? Because now he and she and all these other folks recognize.
Which means they're more approachable and you'll be able to get a lot more done when you are more approachable, I think, especially as a leader. You touched on identifying what type of habits. So let's dive deeper a little bit into that. So how do leaders identify what kind of habits actually need changing? Because that's hard. That's hard when you're a leader.
Which ones don't, right? And so think of it this way, Raj, like if I asked you and anybody, like list 10 behaviors that either get in the way of team functioning or of leader effectiveness. And when I do workshops around this and trainings, like people can come up with that list pretty quickly. They've got like next flip chart.
And this is not the leader coming up with that list. This is the leader's team coming up with that list. Is that correct?
Correct. It could be the
Okay.
leader though. Like in a coaching perspective, a lot of times we do a 360 to help them realize what other people see as getting in their way.
Yeah.
That's correct. So
Mhm.
ideally, you're getting feedback from the team, but most people could quickly generate lists of what behaviors contribute towards ineffective teams or leaders, right? And so those behaviors, I guarantee you, Raj, about all every behavior on that list is a habit. Because if it happened
Mhm.
once, it's not on the list. Like it's a one and done. Everybody got over it. Not a big deal. But it's on the list because it's a habit. It keeps happening. It keeps happening because it's a habitual way of thinking and speaking and acting.
So that's pretty important. Just being able to recognize what's prompting you to behave in a certain way, and it's just because you're so used to doing certain things a certain way. So what are the steps there to do a self-assessment, reflection? Are there tools, methods for gathering feedback? You mentioned getting feedback from teams. What are some of the other ways people can get that? And then we're going to talk about how you can actually build new habits off of that.
So a couple of things I'd say. One is through other types of assessments, right? What you're asking here, Raj, is about how do we raise awareness to someone's habitual way of beings. And so one is like the actual evidence, right? People with whom that they're working with, right? But extending this again into the workplace, but also beyond the workplace, right? When you do a personality assessment, love the Hogan is an example, like that gives them direct feedback on how they are, right? That's baked in at this point in their lives, right? And so that will give them input and insight into their natural strengths and as well as things that could potentially derail them.
So just to clarify, Hogan is a type of, for those who may not know, Hogan is a type of personal assessment, or what kind of tool is it?
So Hogan is a company, right? And Hogan puts out a series of different assessments, right? And so a lot of times when you in the industry, when we're talking about Hogan assessments, we're actually really talking about three different assessments of their package, right? It's strengths, Hogan development survey, which is like potential derailers, and then like motivators, values, interests, right? What motivates somebody, right? So those kinds of, so now I like that because it's based on what I would call the grandparent of personality theory, this 5-factor model, right? A lot of folks in the industry will understand that. There's a ton out there. What I would say though, the online versions that ask you 20 questions and you put in the answers and then it says, oh, look, this is how you are. And you go, oh my God, it knows me. Yeah, not those. Because by the way, they knows you because that's exactly what you just told it. And I'm talking about valid assessments that are used, particularly in business. Hogan's used a lot in business.
Okay. Okay. So now you've got a sense of the types of things that maybe you want to change about yourself, habits that are causing outcomes that you want to be different. So let's talk about the strategies to build new habits. And also tied to that would be breaking the bad habits. So what do you recommend? What's the first step? How do you break it down so you know? And then what are the practical ways you can make those habits stick?
I'm so glad that you gave the lead of breaking bad habits because I think the word of the day here is wedge. Yes, I said wedge, WEDGE. So whether you're trying
Why
to,
is that? Why is the word wedge so important to this conversation?
so if you're trying to start a habit or you're trying to stop a habit, so you're breaking a habit, we need to put a wedge. So think of the pipeline of a behavior, right? So an unconscious behavior. There's an intention that you're probably not even aware of. There's a thought slash judgment. And then sometimes there's a word, but then we act on that. I'll give you an example. So I had a leader who may have mentioned this in another podcast, but it's a great example of putting a wedge, who was trying to lose weight. And he said that I would come home, my wife is cooking dinner, I wouldn't even get out of my suit before I would raid the pantry. And now if I said to him, we'll call him Joe, can you commit to me to not raid the pantry while your wife's cooking dinner that's going to be ready in 10 minutes anyway? He would say, sure. And then when I talked to him again in a week, he would say, I did it for a day. And then I went right back to it.
Such a very relatable story.
That,
Yeah. Yeah.
right. And for a lot of our listeners, right? And so what I'm looking for is a way to put a wedge in his habitual pattern, right? We're trying to break patterns. Again, either break patterns that are happening or break into something to start new patterns. And so what I got him to commit to, which changed everything for him, was, okay, could you commit to, I'm not going to tell you don't go into the pantry, but will you commit to changing out of your suit before you raid the pantry? I said, sure. That was it. That's all it took. So what I did is I broke his pattern. He had to go upstairs, get out of that pattern that just he
Mhm.
did without thought. He had to go upstairs. He had to get out of his suit. And by that point, first of all, he was closer to dinner anyway. But then he broke it, and then he could have choice. When you're doing something habitually, you don't have choice because by definition, it's unconscious. You just do it without thinking. We're just by putting a wedge, we're putting more thought into it. Another example, this person was trying to quit smoking. And I said, okay. And I know we can talk about the leadership examples in a second, but these were leaders also.
Mhm.
I said, so that just brought something, oh, wait, how can we help my personal life here? And so I said, look, I'm not going to tell you not to smoke, but can you commit to this? If you want to smoke, you have to do nothing but smoke. So in other words, you can't talk and smoke. You can't watch a movie and smoke. You can't whatever and smoke. You can't walk and smoke, right? And so you can't drive and smoke. So you have to find your time. And then, by the way, and then I would do all these other things to help increase awareness about what they're actually doing when they're smoking. But this one woman said, I cut it in half just in a week. She said, because I realized I was smoking half of my over a pack a day habit in the car. And now I like literally have to pull over and sit there and smoke. So it became a little bit more inconvenient. But that whole thing, Raj, it all connects. They're just breaking a pattern, right? They're breaking a pattern. Now, hang with me. Let me just flip it to say, what about when you're trying to start a habit? Like, say you're trying to start exercise. And so, what's the
And
wedge?
that's something that so many people struggle with. At the beginning of the year, you have all the resolutions. I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to do this, all that. You stick with it for maybe 1 or 2 weeks, and then that's it. And so sometimes just getting up the motivation to go on the treadmill, go to the gym, wherever, whatever you're doing, is challenging. So let's talk about that then. Yeah, breaking the habit's one thing, but then creating a new one.
That's exactly right. And so I think where people go wrong is they usually when they decide they're going to do something like exercise, they're in the moment. They're like excited. They can see, they can feel it, right? That moment's going to pass, right? Like life's going to get in the way. And it's going to be that first morning where like, yeah, I don't feel like exercising. And then that's it. Then they broke the
Yep.
pattern. They broke the new pattern. And it's too easy to break the new pattern. Why? Because of course it is. Because if they were in habitual, this wouldn't have been a problem. They would have been
Yeah.
exercising all the time.
You're falling back into your old habit. So that's a lot easier to do.
That is correct. And so the old habits don't have any room for exercise. And so this is where you hear this idea of like small steps. I'm like really teeny steps, right? And the example I can think of is my own is when I was in college, I had a gym at my house, like growing up, like I had weights in my house and a space in the basement for it. And I used to work out pretty habitually and then joined a gym. And then I went up to college, right? And the one semester that I was there, like lo and behold, like new pattern. Oops, problem, right? What do we do here? Because I'm out of the habit. I'm out of the pattern that I was in. And now I'm going to have to create a new one. So what did I do? I joined the gym. Great. Makes sense. So then I went. It's great. I worked out at 60 minutes. That was awesome. Then I went again. I worked out 90 minutes. Then I went again. I worked out 2 hours and I never went again. But what was happening was psychologically, I just kept putting all this like expectation of working out longer, which by the way, side note, folks, working longer is not necessarily good for your body, but that aside. And so I came up with what I thought at the time was a 10-minute rule. But now if you type in, Google didn't exist then. If you type in 10-minute rule, it looks like everybody else seemed to come up with the 10-minute rule as well, which was I committed to myself 3 days a week, the very small behavior going to the gym for 10 minutes. So that was small enough. Some people might have to be 1 minute, but it was small enough for me that I was willing to commit to it. And so you got to ask yourself, what's the commitment that nothing's really going to get in the way? Like now half that, now you make that even much smaller. And so what they did is it got me dressed. It got me walking from my dorm to the gym. And then it got my blood going just a little bit. And in the rest of the semester, there was probably, I think once that I worked out for 10 minutes and I like pat myself on the back. Yay, good job. Right. But every other time, of course, I ended up being into it because listen, I broke the pattern. That's again, and then I'll shut up about it. But this is so important. It's so important. Think about this and then I'll turn it over. Think about when you have a big project like these podcasts. putting together and editing. And it's just like, oh my gosh, it's just so much work. And you say, okay, let me just spend 5 minutes on it. Right. And then that broke the pattern. Like now you're unstuck you were stuck at the bottom of the mountain. But as soon as you walk 3 feet into the mountain, you're in the mountain. And now you're in flow. And now you keep going.
I'll tell you just another personal story there. COVID really did a number on me because it did a number on a lot of people, pretty much everybody, right? It just changed the way we worked. And
Right.
so I found myself, and I carried the habit after COVID too, was you just get up in the morning, you put on your sweats, and you just start working. I found that there were days when I would do that and I was just not productive. And I think part of it was because that's what I do on a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning. So it just made that mental connection for me. And I noticed the days when I had a meeting, I needed to get up, shower, shave, dress, put on a nice shirt or something. Those days, the full day, I was so much more productive just because I started the day with the habit that I had, which was going to work. You got to get ready, get, dressed up and everything, go to work. So for me, I work from home like a lot of people do now. And so for me, the pattern is you got to get up and get dressed and be ready for work even though you're not going anywhere but to a different room.
Yes, and then take that to the next step. Then when you're done officially work, change your clothes to your sweats, right?
Yes.
And then truly be done, right? Because
Yes.
that creates a physical shift in your energy and your intent. This all goes to intent. So when the body mind says when you're getting dressed, you're intending to now work and now you're intending to not work, right?
Mhm.
Just like when you talk to sleep experts, they say you should do two things in bed. One of them is sleeping and the other one is not watching TV. And because your body needs to associate going to bed with going to sleep.
Yeah. Let's bring this around to the executive, the leader, and
Yep.
habits that they would need to change. So, great examples about putting a wedge in. Give me an example of, let's say you've identified a leadership habit. Maybe you cut people off when they're talking, maybe, which probably a personal habit that you brought into the workplace, right? Or maybe it's procrastinating on specific activities, like you mentioned. So, what are the wedges you can put in place to break those patterns? And then, how do you build a strong habit that you can take forward?
Okay, I'll give you one that someone working with brought up this week that I've heard him say before, and I think a lot of people can relate to. Think about how many meetings that you have attended that were a complete waste of time.
Death by meeting. Oh my gosh.
And here's the funny thing. Everybody on that meeting is thinking the same thing. This is a complete waste of time.
They are.
And maybe the person that's speaking too long or the facilitator of the meeting who's not interrupting others who are going on way too long or whatever, maybe they're in that moment unconscious, but even they, when it's no longer about them talking, can realize or feeling, right? And so there's a lot of things like that, a lot of ridiculous behaviors, habits that we put up with because nobody wants to speak up and hey, because that would be weird, right? To call your colleagues out. Here's how to make it not weird. And this is going to be, if you remember, maybe nothing else, like this is a great way when you are part of a, say, team. I'm going to stick with team for a second to help change a poor habit of team behavior. And so, step was 2 steps. Step one, raise awareness. Hey, real quick, I've noticed that we have spent 20 minutes on this agenda item that we said was going to be 5 minutes. Hey, I've noticed in the last 5 meetings, it takes us kind of 15 minutes to really get going. And then we end up running over into our next meetings. And I'm thinking if anyone else is like me, we all have meetings afterwards that we're then late to, right? Whatever it is, right? I noticed that some of us speak a lot longer than others and some of us are quiet. So that's the awareness. Now, look, you're just sticking to data, observable data that everybody sees. So you're less likely to get in trouble by just saying, hey, I've noticed X. Has anybody else noticed X? That's all you're doing. You're just like, hey, I just noticed. And a lot of people, we thank God this person spoke up. Then you go, what do you do next? So you do step two, and it's A or B. Either ask a question or make a request. I'm wondering if we can move on to the next agenda item and then circle back to this if we have time later. I'm wondering if we can be a little bit more purposeful around when we start the meetings and when we end the meetings. I'm wondering if we could just end the meetings 5 minutes early so that we can all take a bio break before our next meeting. I'm wondering if, right, or ask a question. Like I said before, does anybody else notice this? Or I wonder what would help us be more efficient. I wonder how, these meetings might be more effective. And here's what you do, like just by asking that question, most people here are problem solvers, right? Like we're going to start. So I wonder how we could be more efficient. I wonder how we could improve these meetings. All of a sudden, people are going to start like chiming in, and you just took a leadership thing because you just inserted yourself and started moving the needle. It's starting to have the conversation about changing a bad habit.
That's really important. Great tips, great examples, great words that people can just pretty much mentally copy and paste and use in their own environments. Let's talk about some of the other challenges that people face, specifically resistance. And that resistance could be external. It doesn't have to be you trying, it could be maybe you're trying to make a habit, make a difference, but they're outside forces. How do you deal with whatever these outside forces are, which could be the people you hang out with, could be where you live, it could be where your office
Yeah.
is, it could be all kinds of other outside factors. How do they influence habit, and what can you do to make adjustments?
Yeah, it's beautiful. In my book, I talk about 7 causes of underperformance, right? And it's the same 7 barriers to underperformance. It's the same 7 barriers that show up in the personal life as well. And so one of them is lack of external resources or support. And to your point, Raj, some of the external influences are negative. And Wayne Dyer back in the day used to say sometimes you have to just divorce your parents, right? If you have a toxic parent in
If
your
you have
life.
a really bad relationship, yeah.
Exactly, that's
Yeah.
just really not good for either one of you. And that's an extreme example, but like so think about the different things. Eliminate, manage, redirect, right? Doing like an audit of, let's say that you're working on a particular behavior that you want to change, a new habit that you want to form, or one that you want to stop. Then what are the external resources? So let's say, I don't know, going back to the smoking one, like spouse refuses not to smoke in the house or whatever, but doing things like a role or a rule, no smoking in the house, or if going into the business world, like how about a rule that no interrupting others until they're finished? Like how about we create a new habit where we use the raise your hand like thing on the virtual call, that we do that before we speak. And so you're looking for little, I even say cute, like little actions, little, again, small, easy things to do that we can all agree with. That's a much bigger lift, Raj, than trying to change the way Bob keeps showing up on the calls, right? That's huge. But if you create a new little habit of, what if we have to raise our hand? And what if we have to like have this thing where we keep count of how many times somebody speaks, right? Now that's a new environment that Bob is going to, it's almost like a self-check thing. So anyways, so first of all, eliminate the things that are getting in the way, and then manage other things that aren't. So if you give me an example of something that you're trying to, could you give me an example of, say, an external influence that you would love to see not there?
I think one of the things that I'm trying to do is journaling. And I love writing. I love business writing. I write very frequently. I post on LinkedIn once, twice a day, and I've got things queued up and everything. But one thing I don't do nearly enough is journaling. And so what would you recommend? Because by the way, the reason I want to do that, there's so many studies that show that journaling helps clarify your own thoughts that can lead you to even more success. And so what would you recommend?
So the second barrier is lack of motivation. You are clearly, the reward clearly for you is not worth the effort. So first, can you just, I don't want to be gentle with yourself, right? If you're motivated enough, you would do it. But so what I say in that is, okay, so what would you truly be motivated to do? Somewhere you have the amount of effort it takes, when think of a scale, maybe the amount of effort it takes is heavier than the reward, the perceived reward. And look, if you start doing it enough and you can see a clear connection between doing it and outcomes that you're looking for, then that is a self like feeding thing and you'll continue to do it. But particularly in something like journaling, where it's almost like looking back, do you maybe recognize the positive? It doesn't have an immediate like impact. It's a little bit harder. So what I would say to you, Raj, is like, all right, so make a much less commitment. And going back to a very teeny step, what if you have a piece of paper and you write every night, you agree, if that's when you're going to journal, to write one word that captures your day, or whatever the topic is that you think you want to journal around. If it's your day, or if it's leadership, or if it's feelings, and it could just be the feeling. And that's it. And you commit to your coach, you commit to somebody who's going to be objective and hold you accountable in a very nice, friendly, loving way. You can connect, you can commit to all your callers just to do that. Right now, you can honestly tell me, like, you could commit to that pretty easily, right?
As you were talking, I actually thought of another way to make this happen. And this is to some degree an external force that I would make happen. And it would be get a small spiral notebook with a pen clipped onto it. And after I make my bed in the morning and go on with my day, before I leave, I put the spiral notebook on the pillow. And that way, the moment I go back to bed in the evening, that notebook is sitting right there in front of me. And that's my cue. Write that one word, write whatever it is in the journal, because
Yeah.
sometimes I
Ye
might look at it and it's on the nightstand and I
Love
actually
it.
like, I'll do it
Yes.
tomorrow." But if it's on my pillow,
Yeah, I love it because you
that
did 2 things.
yeah.
Remember intention, right? So 2 things. One is you made it really easy for yourself. So easy, it's hard to ignore because you actually have to take this notebook off your pillow, right? And
Yeah.
so, but remember, you set an intention by putting it on the pillow. You set an intention at the beginning of the day, and then you
Mhm,
have to take it off the pillow. So that's the wedge, right? You put
mhm.
a wedge to do it. And I'm still all excited about the word thing, right? Because if your commitment is a word, you know that
But you can do it.
absolutely. You're going,
That one is like a microscopic change in the behavior. I really, the more I'm thinking about it, I love this little idea of the notebook on the pillow in the morning, so I see it at night, because that kind of bookends the day. And if I know that all I've got left is one word, that might turn into 2 words, 3
yeah.
words, and so on. But that one word, you're absolutely right. I broke the pattern, and then it starts happening.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's beautiful. I used to teach mindfulness meditation, and a lot of people now, particularly after COVID, are learning the benefits of meditation and trying to develop a practice. One of the struggles that I see a lot of people who are trying to make meditation a practice is the kind of typical standard in the research says 20 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day, right? If you've never meditated in your life, right, and now you're like 20 minutes a day, and you might do it once, you might do it twice, and then you're going to stop doing it, right? And
Hmm.
so the way to do it is you like commit to just 3 deep breaths every day, and then after you do that for a while, by the way, that has, think about it, that was 1.
Yeah,
Now look at my energy difference. So I
I
am much
know.
more present.
It is such a it is one of the biggest things that I think of anyone can ever do is just whatever's going on in your life, the breath. If it all comes right back to the breath, my gosh, your entire demeanor, mindset, outlook, everything
Eh,
changes within seconds.
that's right, and so go back to that scale, right? What's the cost of breathing once a day, breathing purposely in a deep breath? But
Intentional breathing,
it
like you do it
is
subconsciously, but you don't always do it intentionally.
correct, and so
Yeah,
seconds, right? And so
yeah.
then after you've done that for a while, a few weeks, a month, maybe even a few months, okay, so let's build on that. So how about you commit to 1 minute of just sitting there and just being aware of your thoughts, right?
Mhm.
1 minute, right? And then you do that. And what happens, Raj, is you begin that skill begins to shift because you begin to realize the benefits of doing that. And then eventually you're up to your 20 minutes. And then if you're like me, you're doing it 40 minutes, right? And so if you're trying to, here, as we pull this together, if you're trying to break a habit, you need to put a wedge, you need to figure out what the pattern of behavior is and look for a place where you can put a wedge, like the leader who needed to take his suit off before he went into the pantry. If you're trying to create a new habit like journaling, you need to create a wedge into that pattern that's going to break the pattern of not doing it, right? So by putting, in your case, the notebook on top of the pillow, that created intention, right? And broke a pattern and then created a new one. And the commitment has to be really small. And then I would say make sure reward yourself for commitments kept and just make them so small that it's so easy to keep them.
Absolutely. Jeff, this is a wonderful starter pack to get going on changing habits and how these transformational habits can go from personal habits to the workplace habits, team habits, and it all starts with the wedge and then creating a micro step that you can take. Thank you so much, Jeff. We
Sure.
will see you next time.